If you do the wrong way with the wrong intentions, I say quiet hiring is not going to work. And when I reflect back, I felt like, you know what, that was a wage theft. Why do you need to come back, right? Micromanagers are like, I need to literally watch. You got to understand the environment and see if there's something you can do, self-reflect. So by 90 days, I figured it out, self-reflected, what's working, what's not working. And the reality was completely different. If you Google whitening resume, a lot of people are concerned about it. If you want extra from me, what's in for me? I'm going to go somewhere that I am celebrated. Hello. This is Sweta Regmi joining you live from Canada, certified career strategist and resume strategist, founder and CEO at Teach and Do. Today, I have a human rights lawyer. You know where I met her? On TikTok, and I'll slightly share why she's here today. So I'm going to bring her live. She's backstage right now. Her name is Nicole Biros-Bolton, and she's a founder at Biros-Bolton Law. Absolutely follow her because I found her content on TikTok and I could not wait for her to come in and talk about human rights issues and employment issues that you are probably not even aware of it. So she's live right now on TikTok and I'm with her live on TikTok as well. This is such a fun collaboration together. And our thing today is you will know what's possible when you know the law. And I'm going to quickly play something that you want to hear right now before she comes up on a stage. Hang on a minute, okay? So I'm going to share something that it was so fascinating to hear as a South Asian woman, brown woman, coming from the white woman. Yes, she's white, and you cannot wait to hear what she had to say about the law. I'm going to share quickly.
System, I mean, it's very staunched and long, old white male history, right? It was developed a long time ago in the concepts of colonialism when women were not allowed to work, when women were not allowed to vote, or basically essentially think for themselves. And the law moves super slow, much slower than time does. It takes 10 years to really change a concept. And all of these are my own takes and opinions about how the legal system operates. And I can go into that a lot more in another video. It would probably take me, 20 hours to really break it down. But essentially, I think also because it is rooted in that history. And it's not only women that weren't allowed to vote or speak for themselves, but anybody who was not white. So talk about exclusionary, talk about not really justice, not really fair, not really promoting equality. So because of that, we also have a justice system that is not educated or aware, generally speaking, on issues of equality, issues of power imbalance, of inequity, of privilege versus non-privilege, of how we all live our lives and experience our lives in completely different ways based on our identities, our whole experience of identities, not just one identity. We all have many, and some have even more than others. And those identities are often the things that create injustice, right? Because other people don't like our various identities. Other people have hate towards identities and put people in their so-called place because of their identities. And so when you have a justice system that doesn't really understand that, or have a lot of materials to even rely on and refer to, then how do you advance the law? And so I believe that one of the most important things is actually research and publishing important information that analyzes these things based on research, based on fact, based on studies and information, so that the courts can begin to be educated.
All right, you heard that. You heard it first here. A white woman just talking about, hey, the law is not in favor of women and people of color right here. And here I have introducing you, Nicole. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the very warm welcome, Sweta, and nice to see all of you.
Oh my God, I've been such a fan of you on TikTok talking about traumas and issues, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and you educate them. And I'm pretty sure our viewers are going to walk away with so many examples today. Well, Nicole, where did you start from? Because I know that when I was looking at your bio, you were part of the shelter team, and you were volunteering for gender-based violence support, for the rape crisis center. And by 18, you were taking overnight crisis call, offering support to the survivor of violence. And wow, your passion of advocacy led you to, criminal courts as a support person for crime victims. And that's like good segue from how you've seen what's happening in the world, and now you're a lawyer. So how do you feel about helping those people, powerless people, having gone through, the groundwork?
Oh, yeah. I feel very, very strongly. And it definitely is my compass in the work that I do. I get really riled up and passionate about, cases where people have been treated unfairly and unjust because of who they are, essentially. And I do bring that trauma-informed background to my work. I was a counselor and advocate in the trauma world for 20 years. So that really did propel me to become a lawyer and to try and make change, as cheesy as that might sound. I try and do that.
No, it's not cheesy at all. It's amazing that I've always believed in the stories when people actually do the work, groundwork, and then now they're on the other side of advocacy. And then that's exactly why you're here today, because you've seen it. Now you're doing something about it. And that's amazing, amazing feeling to have. Now let's go back to the questions. I'm going to shoot you so many questions today. I'm not going to let you go. So people, write it down right now, because you have no idea what's coming at you. We have tons of questions for Nicole today. So how do you even know if it's a human right violations at workplace or employment rights? Can you give us an example, like one example at least, where people can walk away thinking, oh, I thought it was this, now this is this?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I should just say, because I am a lawyer, that everything I say today is not legal advice, of course. Lawyers can't give legal advice without knowing your individual situation, because literally everybody's experience and details are going to be different, even if they sound similar to something else. And so that's why sometimes it's really complicated, because people will say, well, my colleague was fired and they got 3 years termination pay. And like, why shouldn't I get that? Everybody's case and situation is different, and you don't know the other claims that might also inform a total package. So it could be that they also had human rights complaints that you just didn't know about. So really important to always get legal advice that is individualized for you. But generally speaking, there is a really important distinction that a lot of people don't know, which is just around what is human rights and what isn't. So unfair treatment is not necessarily a human rights issue. The Human Rights Code in Ontario, and it's similar across the country, and also the Human Rights Act, which governs federal institutions, they really govern issues of discrimination. And so there are 3 elements to discrimination, which is negative treatment because of who you are as a person. So one of your identities, i.e. me being a woman, might be why I might be treated differently, but also that it has a negative impact on me. So you have to have all the 3 things for it to be discrimination. If you're just targeted at work, let's say I'm targeted at work by another woman, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason other than she just doesn't like me, that's not going to be discrimination. And it's not going to be a human rights issue. And unfortunately, there's very little you can do about generalized harassment. Not nothing, but a lot less. And, I'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about, the limits of the human rights process, even so, but at least there are some options for folks when they're treated differently because of who they are. And in Ontario, there are 17 or 18 identities under the Human Rights Code, and you can look them up very easily.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Now let's move on to, hey, you realize there might be potential, the violation at workplace, whether it's a human right or employment rights or the justice. As an employee, what's the first step you should take in order for you to protect yourself?
I mean, I think somewhat it's dependent on the situation. Like if you're in an unsafe situation or you are being significantly impacted to the point that your mental health is suffering, then I think the first thing is get on a medical leave, of course, with the support of your medical professional. But like, don't keep yourself in the situation any longer than you have to. And I think sometimes people think, oh, I need to quit immediately. Because this is awful for me, but potentially you're losing leverage by quitting. So what I would do is first talk to your medical professional, see if you can go on a medical leave, a short term, couple weeks, and consult with a lawyer and find out what your options are. Because sometimes, especially if you are experiencing discrimination, so it is a human rights issue, then sometimes you can negotiate an exit package. And that, of course, will give you some money. It'll give you severance as though they fired you. And buy you some time to find a new role. So that's number one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the other thing that I always tell people is that it's really important to document everything and keep a record, especially if all of a sudden you lose your job, you're going to lose access to your emails, access to any potential evidence that you have. So, of course, be careful not to steal company property or send yourself confidential information, but document things, right? Like I even think keeping a journal that is just about the things that are happening at work, dated at the top and just factually right, like this is what happened today, this person said this to me, that can actually be really reliable evidence later on.
See, a lot of people don't know that. And I knew it actually when I was managing the team in corporate world. As a manager, if I knew that I see something's going to come up in a pipeline, if I have to let the employee go, if I had to have difficult conversation, we used to have a folders. We're told, have a folders, document, because you never know when it comes in handy. So for those people out there, you think your manager is not documenting you, they're absolutely documenting you. And if you get fired, they have a case against you because the first thing HR is going to ask, have you talked about this issues? And you have to prove it to the HR because HR is there not for you, let's per se, it's to protect the company's reputations when the lawsuit comes back. So your managers are creating documentations, and as you should be doing the same thing if you disagree.
Yes.
So let's go back, Nicole, to the scenario where you feel like you've been targeted, documented, you know that you're meeting a target, you're doing everything you can, but possibly the managers are coming back to you and not being fair to you. Feel like, let's say you were put on PIP, performance improvement plan, right? And there was a guidelines for you to meet, the SMART goals and whatnot, but you disagree with it. What happens in that case? Because the PIP may be leading to, let the employee go with the cause without the severance package. What happens here if you disagree, and what should you do as an employee?
Okay, so first thing, I think it's important to know that the law generally gives a lot of leeway to managers and supervisors to manage their team and their employees as they see fit. So performance improvement plans included, targeting in on certain improvement areas if they identify that there's failings. The law generally says, look, employers need to make sure that their employees are performing to the expectations that have, been laid out, of course, within the concepts of their role and their job description. But so that's important to know. Like, there is a lot of leeway. But also, if you also have a protected identity, so you're a person of color, you just came back from a medical leave, you've just asked for accommodations, you've just reported harassment or discrimination, unfortunately, almost always with the cases I see, that results in further targeting. And it should not, but it does. And that is called reprisal. It's also illegal, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So, I mean, what should you do? Get legal advice immediately, document everything. And like, I don't know what else to tell you. We can't stop employers from doing what they're going to do. And employers have the right to ensure that things are ticking along properly and effectively, as long as they are not targeting you or treating you horribly just because of who you are as a person or your needs, which may vary from your colleagues. So, I mean, I think that's really important. But the other thing I will say is that if you really suck at your job, your employer still cannot fire you for cause. They still have to pay you unless you do the most egregious thing, like you're embezzling tons of money from them, or even serious sexual assault. Some sexual assaults don't even amount to for cause termination. They have to pay you still. For cause termination is a risky one. And for the employers listening, like, tread carefully. Do not fire people for a cause without getting really good legal advice.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And I understand that Ontario, I don't know if it's whole throughout the Canada, Ontario is at will employment where employer can fire anyone without the reason, given there's a notice period and severance package. Is it true still?
Yeah, so absolutely. So what wrongful termination means is not, oh, they're not allowed to fire you. It's not that it was wrong that they fired you. They're allowed to fire you as long as it wasn't discriminatory. But they do have to pay you. And it's really funny because this is the most contentious topic of all my videos on TikTok. Half the people that comment just say that I'm lying, and I'm not lying when I tell you in Ontario, specifically for provincial employees, and unions are a separate entity. So if you're unionized, this is different. But for non-unionized employees in Ontario, you can be fired. Your employer is allowed to fire you for any reason at all, as long as it's not because of who you are as a person. But the catch is that they probably, in most cases, owe you more than the bare minimum that is guaranteed under the Employment Standards Act. And that is because most employment contracts are not up to date. So employers should be updating their contracts every year because the law changes almost every year in terms of what makes a good, solid, watertight termination clause. And if you have a really good contract with a termination clause that is valid, what it effectively does is limits your notice period to the amount that is guaranteed in the Employment Standards Act, bare minimum, very little. However, most are not valid. So what ends up happening is that you're actually owed much more notice based on the common law, which is the judge-made law. And unfortunately, there's not a very specific formula or code. It really depends on your age, your level of experience, how long you've been in the job, the specialty role you have, the level of education you have, and a whole bunch of other things.
That's perfect. Because a lot of people don't realize, as you talked about it in the beginning, you cannot compare someone else's, even though you are of the same age, you're the same gender. It all depends on how most likely you're going to bounce back. How long would it take for you to take that job again if you got laid off and stuff like that? So little bit like about the layoff. Right now, a lot of layoffs are happening, and severance are left and out. Like I get a lot of questions like for my clients as well, asking, okay, this person got this person got this, and why did I not get it, right? And you're totally right in terms of everyone is different, every case is different. Now, what's the strategy as an employee, as a layoff survivor? What should be they doing first? Because there's a release letter date signed for the employer, right? Is that even valid? Because they will say 1 week, 2 weeks from now. Is it even valid if I don't sign it?
So, I mean, yes and no. Like, honestly, okay, so I'm just going to say it again. This is not legal advice. Don't take my word for it and soar and then say, Nicole, you told me to do this. Because again, it really, really depends on your specific situation. But generally speaking, so if you've been offered, usually what ends up happening as an employer, especially if they know that your that your contract doesn't have a valid termination clause and that you are technically owed a lot more. They're not going to tell you that. They're not going to say, hey, we actually owe you a lot more. Some decent employers do. But usually you get like your minimum notice periods under the Employment Standards Act, which legally they have to give you. But then they also say, and to be nice, and because we recognize how difficult this is for you, it's not them being nice, by the way. They will offer you 4 more weeks, let's say, sometimes a little more. Especially if you're a longer term employee, like 20 years plus, you're owed way more than that. But let's say they offer you 4 weeks and they say, but you have to sign this full and final release, which basically waives all of your rights to sue them for anything at all. And 7 days to sign that. Some employers ask for it even sooner. And don't sign it until you get legal advice. That's my advice. Not legal advice, just advice. But I think it's really important because if you just sign it away, you don't know if what they've offered you is legal. or if you were actually legally entitled to more, and you will not be able to sue them after if you have signed it. So consult, and it even says in the document, I mean, read it, make sure that you read it, but it says in there that you've had the time to consult with a legal advisor and get legal advice that is independent. Make sure that you do that. It does cost money to get legal advice, usually. Like I have to charge for my consults, and I provide advice. I review documents in advance. Some consults are more expensive on the scale. I try and keep mine, it's just under 200. But I provide as much value as I can. Sometimes I even draft emails for clients during that time. If we have the time to do it, I'll give them a good response if they decide they don't want to move forward, because sometimes the advice is, actually, it's a good deal what they've offered you. And so, I think you're safe to take it. But sometimes that peace of mind is helpful too, to know.
Yeah, and that's a great one, right? A lot of people don't realize when I'm working with the job seekers, when you get that employment offer contract, if you make certain amount of money, you want to probably run that by a lawyer too, because the way the employers are exiting you out, it might be dependent on the employment contract you've signed it years ago as well. So a lot of people don't realize that it's too late. Now, is there anything on the contract when you accept the job offer that you can negotiate from the perspective of when this happens, layoff happens, I'm entitled to this one? Can they put it in the writing as well with the lawyers like you?
Well, certainly, a lot of people contact me to review their contracts. So that's always a healthy idea, just so that they understand again what they're signing and agreeing to. Because it's a contract between you and your employer. You have obligations, they have obligations. It's important to understand what those things are. But anything can attempt to be negotiated, but your employer very well might say no. But at times they might say yes, like certain things like, oh, I noticed that I only had this many vacation days, but I thought we talked about this, and they might say, yeah, sure, I'll change that. Probably they're not going to change things about the termination clause, but you can always try. And I thought just address it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, oh, sorry, God, I don't think you guys can hear it, but I'm like, something's ringing in my ears.
You don't hear me. We don't hear it.
Okay, good.
I've seen the executive level negotiations where they are negotiating the exec package. So let's say if I'm not the right fit, even if there was a termination with the cause, they're dictating a package as well. So I gotta get this, or if there's a relocation package or something, they're not going to pay it back, or the sweetener they had and the sign back bonus, because a lot of employers, they have a clause inside saying if you were let go or things doesn't work out in a couple of years from now, you have to get this money back, right? So these are the one that you can dictate it, because on the layoff package, there's just going to go and then give you whatever it is, but you might have to pay those things back as well. Is it advisable for someone who's making more than a certain amount of money, and there's like vested stocks and bonds and everything part of it? Should they have a lawyer to review that contract, and can you guys do something about it to negotiate on behalf of them?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. So again, like there is recent case law that says that entitlement to employees are not just entitled to their base pay; they're entitled to their bonus, to their stocks, anything that's going to vest, and so that definitely can be part of negotiation. If you get that way, I guess what I should say is that usually the first step. So if you identify with a lawyer that, oh, I should be owed way more, and you decide to proceed, then the next step usually is to send a demand letter. At least that's my preference, because I like to try and see if we can come to an agreement before litigating, which is costly, time-consuming, no guarantee, takes forever, etc. Like your protracted litigation can be 5 to 7 years long, and sometimes you have to do that. But it's always nice to start with a demand letter. Demand letters are basically letters that outline the law, outline what happened, and then make an offer to settle. Those letters do not have to legally be responded to by the other side. So some employers choose not to respond. Most do. And then out of those, the majority respond with a lowball offer to say, okay, fine. And that's usually a door opening to say, let's negotiate and compromise and see if we can get to an agreement. But then some also say, go away. No, we're not budging. And then at that point, the individual has a choice about what they do next.
Yeah, and then if they have a choice to go and litigate, and that's not advisable because it's going to be a lot of cost, right? How much is the normal demand letter cost if someone was to hire you and then go from their average demand letter cost, or would it
Well,
depend on the case by case?
it does depend on the case. I'll tell you. So a lot of demand letters I'll do on contingency fee, which means that they don't pay for my time unless I get them more than whatever they were offered, and then they have to pay 33% of whatever they got. That's something I always am upfront about, and I always explain to them that's a lot. Like if you're looking at a big package, that can be a lot. It's a chunk from your pay. So I like to be as transparent about that as possible. And it's a gamble on my part because again, a lot of employers don't respond, or employers respond and say no. But then what I do is I switch. So if it doesn't work out on the demand letter, then to litigate, which means to go to court or to go to the tribunal, I usually do on my hourly rate. But I'm somewhat flexible. I try and provide sliding scale. So I'll sometimes reduce my hourly rate. I'll sometimes do a joining of the two, so a reduced contingency fee and a reduced hourly rate. It really depends on the case, because a lot of consideration on my part also has to be about how strong the case is and whether you're actually going to get a significantly higher amount. And I'm also quite honest to say it's not really worth your time, because at the most you're going to get another month. And why would you by the end of the day when you pay me, it's not going to be worth your time. So it really depends on the case.
Absolutely. And again, as you said, going back to documentation is the key, and you never know when it comes in handy. So let's say in the event that you were dismissed, there's a constructive dismissal where your roles and responsibilities were now not at the point where you were originally hired for. It could be part of the wrongful termination as well. And you got to speak up, document it. And the funny part that I realized, I think after I got laid off as well, so many years ago, when they give you, so sometimes this is the catch, right? Sometimes employee might think that, oh, I have a less work to do. I no longer have a reporting line right now. I used to have a reporting line, and you're happy about it, but that could potentially count as a constructive dismissal as well. And people don't realize it. And later on, they're like, oh, you have no work here. You're let go, right? Could that be an issue? Could that be employment rights, or would that fall under human rights, violations, in your opinion?
Well, so yeah, maybe. So I mean, constructive dismissal generally, be careful with. I always try and caution people, don't just assert constructive dismissal yourselves. So first of all, constructive dismissal means basically your employer has changed your job in such a way, whether that's because it's so hostile that you can't possibly work there anymore, something horrible has happened at the workplace, harassment, violence, and they haven't addressed it properly, so it's an unsafe space for you, for example, or they've changed your job duties and pay in such a significant way, not just a little bit, because they are allowed to adjust things both in pay and salary and job roles, but in such a significant way that they've made it essentially a different job. And so what it means, constructive dismissal, is that they've effectively fired you. So you quit and then you claim severance or notice period. But be careful, because it's hard to prove constructive dismissal. So if you just quit and then you try and prove constructive dismissal, but you're wrong, you're not getting anything. Whereas if you get a lawyer and try and negotiate an exit package, potentially you could get more. So it's always better to just consult first and find out, okay, is this a constructive dismissal claim or is it not?
That's a very good point. Now, that leads me to the next question I've been hearing a lot. Those employers who hired you as a remote worker, now they want you to be back, and there's no accommodation in the place. I was hearing somewhere the law says that it could be part of constructive dismissal as well, because they didn't have a remote working policy. They didn't have any policy to get them back to work. What are your thoughts on it? Do the employee have a case? So they were hired. Case is they were hired as a remote worker. Now they're like, we're going back to office, and now no accommodations, and leave or quit or you get fired. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think so. The courts and judges generally look at things and they ask, is this reasonable, right? So it is reasonable for an employer to want an employee to start coming in. I don't think to all of a sudden say, hey, next Monday, 5 days a week. I think they should roll it in. So employers listening, like take your time and do it properly and write out a policy and give notice to your employees that this is what's happening and this is why that's happening. If you want retention and you want employees to be happy and feel like they're being respected, then, give them some time and warning and be transparent as possible. But also think about like why we might need to work from home. So, is it an accommodation? Like, is there a medical need? And if it is, then you should get a medical note. The employer is allowed to ask for medical documentation, not your diagnosis, but your symptoms and restrictions that's supported by a medical professional. And that's like legitimate on their part. And you have a role as the employee to make sure that you voice the reasons you need an accommodation and back it up with medical documentation as well.
Right. Just to recap, just let's say that the same topic, exactly the same scenario. The job description was posted. It was remote work only. There was no communication about hybrid models. So employee thought that it's going to be remote work. I'm good. Now, all of a sudden, people were wanted back. So that's possible. Employee can dictate that as well, as long as they provide enough notice and they're willing to work. It's reasonable. Is it okay in the law?
Do you mean, is it okay for the employer to ask them to come back?
Yeah.
Usually, but again, really depends on the type of work, the reasons, how, like all of it is a bit dependent on that. Like there are some jobs where you absolutely need in-person work, or there's customer service element or something like that. But it could also be team building, and generally speaking, they're okay. They're allowed. And the way the law works, it's like they see it as like, well, the employee has a choice. They can leave, or they can comply. But again, that's really generalized.
Yes.
So there may be situations where it's not okay.
Perfect. So there's no black and white for people.
No,
Just just because employee wants you back, that does not mean that, hey, it's a discrimination. So not black and white.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't actually. And I guess on that, like asking for full-time remote is really hard to do, even when you have an accommodation requirement, and employers don't have to accommodate you as you see the best accommodation being. And that's the hardest thing for people to get around. I know that I need to be working from home to operate properly, but the employer doesn't have to do that. It's a two-way street. You need to compromise and both explore alternatives if that one's not going to work, which is hard.
Great. I know, right? Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the disability. So employees working from home and they can't go back, there's no accommodation in the place. So what are your employees? What are your rights as an employee? So employer, medical doctor were involved, whatever it is, so they're like, you know what? I can't go back to work. Or what are your options as an employee to fight back?
Yeah, well, so again, it's a duty that both have. So the employee has a duty and the employer has a duty in the process of accommodation. So the employee has to be upfront and ask for an accommodation. Equally, though, the employer, if they notice all of a sudden that the employee is behaving differently, like significantly differently, instead of just firing them, they do have a duty to inquire and to say, what's going on? Is everything all right? Is there anything I can do to help? Like that's a really important part of the accommodation process as well. So both have a responsibility right at the beginning about discovering what's going on. What do you need? And then of course, so medical documentation, absolutely reasonable for the employer to ask for. The employee has to give it. Again, not a diagnosis. The diagnosis is private and it can be discriminatory if an employer is insisting on having it. But the restrictions, the symptoms, the employer also has liability issues. They need to make sure that it is safe for the employee to be working wherever they are working, depending on the circumstances. Are they doing heavy lifting? Is there, an issue with travel or driving? Like, there are so many different roles and responsibilities that people have. And then sometimes employers don't trust the medical information that has been provided. That's when it gets really complicated and tricky and frustrating as anything for the employee who is just trying to get the help they need. And this is like a really vague area of the law. Can an employer ask for you to have what's called an IME, an independent medical examination? Not right away. It can't be the first request, but sometimes they can. And again, this is really circumstantial, really dependent on the facts of your situation. But there are times if they suspect that the doctor that you've provided a note from is biased or being an advocate. So if the doctor writes something like, I'm just trying to help this person, and being really convincing and not just writing medical statements, then that can lead to the employer not believing them or suspecting that they're just trying to advocate rather than being honest about what their assessment is. And then they can elevate it to independent medical examinations, which are just a bit more cumbersome. And it's a doctor that the employer chooses themselves.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I've heard that you don't have any option to back out. If they actually do that. Is that true?
Well, no, not necessarily. It depends. It really depends. I would say just be careful. Like if you're all of a sudden saying, nope, absolutely not, I'm not going to do that. At some point, it might be that the employer has discharged their duty to accommodate. If they've been, working with you the whole time, you've provided these medical notes, but they're somewhat contradictory, or they're from different medical practitioners. And then you get to the point where they ask for an IME and you're saying, no. Be careful, because at some point they might say, well, we've tried to accommodate you. And oops, I don't know why my live is asking me to verify something.
Oh, that happens in TikTok. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Oh, I have to drag a puzzle piece. This is
Yeah,
very weird. Okay.
I can only go live for more than 30 minutes. Go ahead.
There, I
good. Okay, good. TikTok.
Hi, TikTok. And I see you all in the comments. We will get to you.
Yeah, we'll
I
get
promise.
to you.
There's just lots to talk about. And now I forget what I was saying. Oh yeah. So, I mean, at some point you might be facing a termination, and that termination might be deemed to be legitimate if at that point it's like, well, you can't do your job anymore. We've tried to accommodate you, but we need more information. You're not giving us that information. So the contract can't continue. So just be really careful. Try and get legal advice or do some research before you do that.
Perfect. So they are allowed to, let's say, if nothing's moving, it's not moving, and no one's willing to budge or something, they could potentially fire you based on the case they've made it.
Potentially, because I don't want to say they are allowed,
Yes.
because in a lot of cases they are absolutely not.
Yes.
But potentially. So there's just risks there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What else I have that we can take questions here. Just have a couple of questions here. Do the employer have to okay, so from the world I came in, right? If I were to fire, and then going back to the cause and no cause. So came from the world where for me to fire someone, I had to follow the protocol, which is like, hey, heads up, notification. Second is verbal warning. The third is written warning. The fourth is the final written warning. And then it's clearly outlined, if this doesn't happen, if you're late for within another 60 days, then the next step would be this, or you get terminated, right? Is that the requirement, or is it the processes that employers have in place?
Yeah. So talking provincially again, because it's different for federal employees. Yeah. So if you work for a bank or Canada Post or any airline or anything that crosses borders of provinces, different law. But provincially employed in Ontario, you don't have a staged discipline process that is required before terminating. You can just terminate.
Right. Okay. Because a lot of people think that, oh, I didn't get this, and all of a sudden I got fired. But then that's when the thing is, cause or without the cause. This is where it stays in, right? So cause would be something you'd be talking.
Well, actually, and cause is only gross misconduct, right? So usually it's not cause. Usually it's almost always without cause. But yeah, again, people sometimes want to say to me look, I was amazing. Let me tell you about the last 2 years and how great I was. It doesn't matter. You could be top of your game, top performer, got loads of promotions, best in your class. They can still fire you. They're allowed to fire you. They can just decide they want to fire you, as long as it's not discriminatory and as long as they pay you enough notice. Those are the two
things. Such a valid point, because a lot of people don't know. They just try to build a case and they're allowed to. It's just a matter of cause or severance or not. Now, the other questions that has been coming on, I think the social media monitoring right now, monitoring law has come into the effect in Ontario, right? Putting the software in the computer for staff and making them sign it. I think I believe it's if you have more than 25 employees or something like that, you have to disclose that we're monitoring everything on a company, the computer or whatever it is. So in that case, what happens, let's say that you are using the company's time to go on social media and whatever it is, posting or do whatever it is. Can you get fired with the cause on that one?
Borderline. So it could amount to time theft, and time theft has in the past been upheld as a for-cause termination in Ontario, but every case is different, has to be really extreme. Probably in that case, you have to have warnings. You have to, be flagrant about, dishonestly continuing. If the social media post is, somehow negatively impacting the company you work for, so you're saying awful things about the company, you're harming their reputation, that could be another X against you and potential for cause. But again, the bar is super high for cause. So
I want to talk, because the second question would have been, and you address it. So let's say I work for the company, certain company, they see me as an ambassador, as an employee, right? So anything I write online, post online, if it's on a sensitive issues or something like that, where I totally disagree and it could be seen as bullying and harassment, anything like that, can I get fired? Even though I'm not talking about my company, but I'm going around to people's posts and tweeting about it, or being very edgy and being a bully, or you could literally see it, but you cannot, those fine line. Can people get fired with the cause, or fired, or be spoken
fired?
To? Those?
Of course you can be fired, because again, you can be fired for any reason at all, whether you're good or bad at your job. The question is for cause. So, and just to be clear for our listeners and viewers, for cause termination means your employer has to pay you zero. Like, you're fired today, see you later, that's it. End of agreement, no money tomorrow. It is so hard for an employer to do that. It's very, very difficult. So again, being generally unruly in an organization, or doing things that the employer asks you not to do, that's not going to reach the bar of for-cause termination. But if you're saying things that negatively impact your employer, or sharing company secrets, stealing company property, poaching clients, all of that could potentially amount to for-cause termination. And any kind of physical assault, again, could, but not always, amount to for-cause termination.
Okay, one last question from my list, and we're going to take the questions from social media and then your TikTok as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is so sensitive, and I've seen people getting fired over it, to be honest. Okay, so can you sign the NDAs, which is non-disclosure agreement, for your salary, and then you disclose it, right? Can you get fired?
You can get fired for any reason at all. So yes.
Yes.
Yes. Your job is not just ironclad.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So basically, is it because, any reason, let's put it on this one. Are employers allowed to have you sign that NDA, non-disclosure agreement, for a salary? So you're not supposed to tell other people. Are they allowed? Is it legal?
I mean, if they ask you to sign and you willingly sign it, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen the NDA. So again, I can't say for sure that each one is legal, because each one is going to be different. Were you under duress when you had to sign it? Courts have said that, for example, employers have the right to change their contracts and update them, and they should, because that's how they're going to protect themselves from all that extra notice that they would typically owe otherwise. So, I mean, and the courts have said, look, you have a choice. You can leave or you can sign. You're not being held there and forced to sign. It does sometimes feel like that, because you're like, well, I'm going to lose my livelihood. But employers do have a right to change things and address things. So as long as you're not under duress, then potentially if you're going to sign something agreeing, then it could be legal. But yeah, I don't know enough without seeing what the NDA says.
Yeah, because I remember in the previous world, we were all supposed to sign, even as a manager too, there's terms it's confidential, confidential performance review, letter, it's confidential, right? Everything is NDAs kind of thing. And I kind of like, I thought about it when we don't, and we talk, I know that you're huge on gender, like, gap as well, right? Pay equity and stuff like that too. And when that happens is, I've been talking about a lot on social media, is when we don't talk about our salary, sometimes this is exactly where employers get away with it, because what's the point of having that? Who are you protecting? You know what I mean? So, and imagine the public company posts the salary, and even in Canada right now, it's a requirement in Vancouver and other provinces, right? So now it's a battle that you're gonna have to fight it. And I've seen people getting fired because they disclosed the salary. I was like, wow, reflecting back on it, was that the right thing to do, right? So,
well, yeah, no, I mean, like, this is just a personal opinion, but I have read the research that actually says that it's a barrier to hiring diverse folks when you don't post salaries. And think about people who don't have a lot of money or time. Maybe they're a single parent and they're trying to juggle 3 jobs and they're trying to get a foot up the ladder in terms of their career. And do you know how long it takes to apply for a job? Like, it takes forever. All the work that has to go into revising your resume, writing a new cover letter, researching, then sending it. Like, that's a lot of work. And if you don't even know what the salary is at the outset, like, is it going to be enough for you to be able to get rid of the other 3 jobs and to support your family? Like, it would be so much better if we could be more transparent. But that is a personal opinion.
me too.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of immigrants and underprivileged community and newcomers, and the first thing is they don't want to negotiate because they want to pick anything, and they have no idea. Even if you research, the ranges are so bad right now. It would be from 90,000 to 200,000. Like, where do you fall in? How do you determine who gets 90, who gets like the top of the line, right? And when you are not transparent, it definitely impacts like people like us, people of color, and people who are not going to negotiate because they want to take whatever it's on the plate, or they haven't done enough research. Even the research does not make sense on it. So I was a huge advocate on, hey, give us the range. Let us decide if I want to apply or not, right? So a lot of people don't even negotiate. They don't know how to negotiate. Colleges and university do not teach them either. And it's sad out there that employers now are firing people because they're not paying them enough. It's a battle, they're fighting it. And when they find out someone else is getting paid higher than exactly for the same role, same experience, and where do you go from there? As a person from law perspective, what do you suggest when you know that blatantly they were paid less? What would you do as a lawyer? What would be your advice?
Well, so pay equity typically is between genders, so like men and women being paid differently. So if it is a case where it's clear that usually you have to have like a comparator group. So there's somebody in a significantly similar role that is, carrying out similar responsibilities and tasks, and they're getting paid more and their gender is different. Usually it's a man getting paid more. One, it's a human rights claim. So you can say that's discrimination. You can also report it to the Pay Equity Commissioner because they're trying to monitor employers rolling this out and ensuring that they're the equal pay for equal work. But it's quite a technical area of law. So again, probably good to get advice.
Yes. And I love it. Like in my industry as well, same thing, coaching and training industry. When someone is asking me, what do you think about this? My answer is, it depends. And I love that too. It depends on people.
It always depends.
Yes.
It really does.
Yes.
It's a frustrating answer to hear, but it always depends.
It's the right thing to say though, right? Right thing to absolutely say. It depends, because every case is different. You are unique. Your stories are unique, and your experience are unique as well. So do you want to take some questions from TikTok? I'm pretty sure there are like so much. I'm going to look.
Yeah, there's lots. So, I mean, one that I can probably answer quickly is, can a company cap severance pay? So, for example, 2 weeks per year, but capped at 18 months. I mean, yes, if they have a really, really, really good termination clause, what they're going to do is they're just going to exclude any common law notice period. So the judge-made law, and they're going to limit it to the Employment Standards Act. They can never give you less than what the Employment Standards Act guarantees you. And so again, language has to be really clear and concise, and most termination clauses are not valid, but some are. But they can cap severance as long as it's in your contract and you've signed it. So that's one question. Maybe I'll just scroll through and see if I can find one more. Oh, somebody says, I have a question, but I don't see what their question is. But yeah, feel free to put more. And I see there's some on LinkedIn, Sweta, so I don't know if you want to do more there. Do you want me to just answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I just want to know what would happen if one of the team members complained to HR about their manager. Just to understand. Well, I guess it depends what you're complaining about. So again, this is like a big line in the sand. If there is, for example, sexual harassment going on and you complain, and management knows about it, they absolutely have a responsibility to investigate it. They have to investigate it. They have to respond. They have to ensure that they're providing a safe space for you. Unfortunately, what I see happen more often is that they don't really properly investigate it, or I've even seen where somebody's claimed sexual assault and then they get the perpetrator and the person who's claimed it in the same room to ask them what happened. No, do not do that. How harmful and traumatic that is for the person that is coming forward. But also, typically, unfortunately, what happens is then the person who complained starts to get targeted, reprised against, terminated. Also, don't do that. But what should happen? They should investigate and respond to any complaints of harassment.
That's a great one. And I know that we've talked about this, and I learned from your TikTok videos as well. So as a manager, even if someone comes to me, my direct report comes to me and says, it's confidential, I don't feel good about it, don't tell HR, but this has happened, and that's an incident, bullying, harassment, anything like that, that's no longer confidential. You could be liable for it. Can you speak more on that? Because for the leadership team out there, you better know what you're doing.
Yeah, sorry. Can you just rephrase the question? So if
so someone tells you like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, but I don't want to complain to HR. It's confidential between you and me, but I've been feeling this. I've been bullied or harassed. There's an incident involved. As a manager, what are you liable for?
Don't keep it confidential. Don't keep it confidential. It's not confidential. You are liable. You have an obligation, a legal obligation to investigate and respond. And if you keep it under wraps, your job's going to be at risk, because then the person can file a human rights claim saying that the employer and you failed to respond appropriately. You have to. And I think that's really important. Just be upfront and say, I respect what you're telling me, and I respect how difficult this is. I cannot keep it confidentially. Legally, I have to respond. I have to ensure that the workplace is a safe space.
That's a great one. So is it only apply to the management team who's leading the team, or everyone working into the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a first level employee that doesn't have any reports, less responsibility. I think really the company is responsible when management or the operating mind of the organization is aware and doesn't do anything about it. So that's really on the other side what you would have to prove, that someone in management knew about it.
Okay. Was there any other questions, Nicole, that I forgot to ask you, or do you wanted to address it before we leave?
Yeah, I'll just maybe answer one other question, which is that can an employee be fired while on LTD, long-term disability, after 2 years with no payment? I mean, potentially, yes. So here's the thing. After 2 years, if the employee has been deemed permanently disabled, their medical professionals have said there is no recovery foreseen for this individual, then the employer doesn't really have a duty to continue to employ that employee indefinitely. It basically comes down to, and again, this is general, but it basically comes down to a frustration of contract. The contract can't continue because it can't be fulfilled in the way that the parties envisioned it going, because the person can't do the job. So it is usually a 2-year timeline. And that can happen. But again, I would say get legal advice and be sure.
Question on that one on the LTD, continuing with that. So let's say employees on LTD, and they want to go back, but it feels like that's probably not the job they're able to handle it anymore, and accommodation is required. So would employer have to come up with the job that employee can handle it? Are they obligated to do it? Is it part of accommodation, or what if they don't have anything other than what they were supposed to do? What happens there?
Then unfortunately, it's in some cases it does end up being a frustration of contract after 2 years if the person doesn't recover, and if there is literally no role, or they've tried every role and the employer has really made efforts to accommodate, adjust, change shifts, change roles, but literally they've run out. I mean, I think that happens a lot in physical jobs where There's a factory and all the jobs have some sort of requirement that the individual just can't do because of their disability. At some point, the employer's duty is discharged.
And what happens in that one? So if he feels like, it's unfair, and then, it's cut in, like, what do the employees do at that point? They just like hire a lawyer?
Sometimes nothing. Like if the employer really has tried, because otherwise it could be a failure to accommodate. But if the employer really has tried and there is no option, then it could unfortunately just be something where you have to move on. The one thing I'll say, which I haven't said, but always be aware of timelines. You do not have endless amounts of time to file legal claims against employers. It's very strict and very hard to pass. And so many people will say, on my comments on TikTok, like, oh, well, I was just waiting until my grievance with my union finished, or I was just waiting for, WSIB to finish, or whatever it is. Don't wait, because you won't be able to file. If you want to file a human rights claim in Ontario or Canada, it is 1 year only. And that is like very hard to get an exception to. And if you want to file a claim for wrongful termination, it's 2 years. So just keep those in mind. You can't change those deadlines.
That's a good one. I was going to ask you how long. So 1 year for human rights, would that apply for the union employee as well?
In Ontario, if you're unionized and you have a human rights claim, discrimination based on your identity or sexual harassment, you are entitled to file a human rights claim.
Okay, what about
1 year.
disability? What about the
disability? Yep.
It's part of it too.
Discrimination. Yep.
Okay.
It's 1
And
year.
it's not the lawyer. You have to go to a human right lawyer. Like, do you take the cases?
You can get. Yeah. So that's what I do. I'm a human rights lawyer and an employment lawyer. And a lot of people are asking how to reach me. So maybe I'll just say that, which is one, you can DM me on TikTok. I try my best to respond to everybody. 2, you can go to my link in my bio and you can find my website, my contact form, but my website is www.birdbolt, like the lightning bolt, law.ca.
Wow, isn't that great? Wasn't she awesome? Do you have any other questions here that you want to talk about?
No, I mean,
we're live. Let's see. We're not live on TikTok. People have like questions, so many questions. Let's see here. And I know that when I'm live on LinkedIn, a lot of people don't come to me because their employers must be watching, but then I'm sure that I get those questions later on. And also for those people who are just catching up live right now, you have an option to watch the replay. There's a newsletter that's going out and we recap everything, teachingdo.com/newsletter, and we'll put her contact in there as well for you. So feel free to sign up for our newsletter for replay. We've covered, I think, Nicole, more than 10 questions with an example, and that's beautiful. To get these advice, you have to pay a lawyer, guys. So make sure you watch this and know what your rights are, because once you know what's possible, what's not possible, you would be at the right stage, and you need to get access to this information for free. And this is why I brought expert like Nicole, and she's amazing on TikTok. You should definitely follow her on LinkedIn as well. Nicole, anything else you want to add before I leave at all, so I can wrap it up?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great chat. And TikTok, I'm at Empathy Lawyer. So find me there.
Yes, that's great. Well, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to probably say bye on TikTok as well to your audience too. I'm going to wrap it up on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook, wherever we're live. But any questions, reach out to her directly. I'm not a legal expert, just so you know. I'm a certified career and resume strategist and personal branding strategist. I teach you how to land that amazing 6-figure jobs and quit the toxic world, because you deserve much better than that. Go where you're celebrated. And if you're laid off, make sure you consult the lawyer. Also, if you don't speak up, if you do not document right now, it's not going to happen. So lawyers need those evidence to protect you, protect your right. And this is why I bring guests like Nicole to advocate for your rights. Thank you so much for watching in, and I'll be live soon as well. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Teach and Do. Thank you, everybody. And Nicole, thank you so much for joining me live. And we should do this often. What do you think?
Yes, we should. I agree.
All right.
It's been a joy.
I know.
Thank you.
Bye. I'll see you backstage.
Bye.